My name is Rebecca, 33 years old. I stood on the pristine lawn of my new $2.5 million estate watching caterers arrange $25,000 worth of food for a party I did not even want to host. What was supposed to be my housewarming had been hijacked to celebrate my younger sister. But then my phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number, a 3-minute video of my family mocking me and plotting to steal this very house. I smiled, canceled the caterers, changed the smart locks, and left to get a massage. When they arrived to an empty, locked house in the sweltering heat, I sent them the video. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart toxic family members who thought they could take advantage of your success. It is 10 o'clock in the morning. The sun is already beating down on the immaculate landscaping of my new property. I am pacing the stone patio, my phone pressed to my ear while I point a manicured finger toward the far end of the lawn. I calmly but firmly instruct the catering manager to move the champagne tower out of the direct sunlight. I remind the florist that the imported white hydrangeas need to be misted with water before noon or they will wilt. As the founder and CEO of an elite crisis management and public relations firm, I do not do things halfway. When I am hired to fix a corporate scandal, I fix it permanently. When I host an event, it is absolutely flawless. This house is my ultimate sanctuary. I paid $2.5 million for it entirely in cash. There is no mortgage, there are no co-signers, just the tangible result of a decade of relentless work cleaning up catastrophic messes for high-profile clients. Today was supposed to be my victory lap. A sophisticated housewarming party to celebrate the fact that I had built a highly lucrative empire from absolutely nothing. But my parents, Richard and Susan, had entirely different plans. 2 weeks ago, my mother called me in fake tears, begging me to share the spotlight. My younger sister, Madison, was finally pregnant. According to my parents, Madison and her husband, Trey, desperately needed this morale boost. Trey is a flashy, smooth-talking African-American startup founder who always wears custom-tailored suits and talks a massive game about his tech company. I have always seen right through his arrogant facade. My parents insisted that my beautiful new backyard was the perfect wealthy backdrop for their grand pregnancy announcement. I was annoyed. Actually, I was quietly furious. But as a crisis manager, I am heavily trained to calculate the path of least resistance. Arguing with my mother about her golden child Madison always ended in a dramatic, exhausting blowout, and I just wanted a peaceful weekend in my new home. So I swallowed my pride, wrote the $25,000 check for the luxury catering out of my own pocket, and allowed my housewarming to be completely hijacked. I check my gold watch. It is exactly 10:15 in the morning. The guests, 50 of Trey's supposed VIP tech investors, and a handful of our relatives are expected to arrive at 1 o'clock sharp. The caterers are busy setting up the expensive carving stations for the Wagyu beef. The massive ice sculptures are glistening near the pool. I take a deep breath, trying to force myself into the role of the supportive, quiet older sister. I walk toward the massive kitchen island to grab a bottle of sparkling water when my phone suddenly vibrates on the cool marble counter. I pick it up. It is an iMessage from an unknown number. There is no text greeting, just a video file attached. It is exactly 3 minutes long. My pulse slows down, shifting into a familiar rhythm. In my high-stakes line of work, anonymous messages usually mean a wealthy client is about to hit the front page of the tabloids for a terrible mistake. My brain instantly shifts into aggressive damage control mode. I tap the glass screen and hit play. The video is shaky at first, filmed from a hidden angle in what clearly looks like Trey and Madison's living room. The lighting is dim, but the voices echoing through my phone speaker are unmistakable. It is Trey, Madison, and my parents. They are sitting around a coffee table, clinking glasses of expensive wine and laughing. My stomach tightens into a cold knot. I turn the volume all the way up and stand perfectly still in my empty kitchen, listening to the people I share blood with plot my absolute financial ruin. The camera angle in the video is slightly obscured, looking exactly like a smartphone propped up behind a stack of books on a shelf. I can clearly see the four of them lounging in Trey and Madison's cramped apartment living room. My mother, Susan, is holding a large glass of red wine, her face flushed with alcohol and deep amusement. My father, Richard, is leaning back in a worn-out recliner, looking incredibly smug. Trey is standing near the kitchen counter, wearing one of his signature tailored vests, gesturing grandly like he is giving a motivational speech. Madison is curled up on the sofa, her hands resting on her slightly swollen belly. They are celebrating. But they are not celebrating the new baby. They are celebrating my destruction. Trey takes a sip of his bourbon and smiles at my sister. He tells her that tomorrow is going to be the absolute biggest day of their lives. Madison laughs, a high-pitched grating sound that I have endured my entire life. She tosses her blonde hair over her shoulder and looks right at our parents. She says I still cannot believe Rebecca is actually paying $25,000 for the catering. She is so desperate for our family's approval. Susan chuckles loudly and replies that it is the least I could do since I am so difficult and demanding to be around. Then Madison delivers the line that makes the blood freeze completely in my veins. She smirks and says, "Let her pay for it. What else is she going to spend her money on anyway? She is just a barren, unlovable ATM. It is not like she will ever have a real family of her own." I do not flinch. I do not cry. In my line of work, emotions are massive liabilities. I just keep my eyes glued to the screen and keep watching. Trey claps his hands together, drawing the room's attention back to him. He tells them to focus on the real prize. He explains his master plan with terrifying confidence. He says that his tech startup is completely out of cash, and his private investors are starting to ask very aggressive questions. So during the peak of the party tomorrow afternoon, right when all 50 of his wealthy VIP investors are eating my expensive food and drinking my champagne, he is going to make a grand announcement. He is going to stand on my stone patio, raise a glass, and declare that his company just acquired my $2.5 million estate to serve as their brand new corporate headquarters. I watch Trey strut around his apartment laying out his fantasy. He truly believes his own lies. He tells Madison that once the investors see the luxury and power of my estate, they will blindly trust his tech company. He explains that perception is reality in the business world. My mother nods along, completely enchanted by Trey's fake charm. She actually praises him for being so resourceful. She says it is about time my success benefited the people who actually matter. Hearing my own mother validate a plot to steal my home feels like a physical blow to the chest, but I force myself to breathe evenly. I analyze their body language, the casual cruelty in their voices. They are not acting out of desperation. They are acting out of pure entitlement. They truly believe I exist solely to fund their delusions of grandeur. Then my mother asks the critical question. She asks Trey what happens when I hear him announce the fake acquisition. She worries I might snap and ruin the pregnancy announcement. Trey laughs loudly. He tells my mother that I am a crisis public relations manager, and my entire career is built on maintaining flawless public images. He confidently states that I will never dare to make a scene or publicly correct him in front of 50 elite investors. He knows I detest public humiliation. He plans to use my professionalism against me, forcing me to smile and nod while he steals my property right in front of my eyes. He calls it the perfect checkmate. It is a vicious, calculated trap, but it still lacks the legal teeth to actually transfer my property. Trey cannot just speak an acquisition into existence without collateral. That is when my father, the man who walked me to my first day of school, delivers the final lethal blow. Richard leans forward in his recliner, the ice clinking in his glass. He waves off my mother's concerns with a lazy flick of his wrist. He looks directly at Trey, with a proud, conspiratorial grin. Richard says, "Do not worry about Rebecca. I already forged her signature as a guarantor on the loan draft. I sent the documents to the private lenders yesterday afternoon. By the time she figures it out, the money will be in your account." She will not make a scene in front of the VIPs today, and she will be legally bound to your debt by Monday morning. The video ends. The screen goes black. I stand in the silence of my kitchen, the marble floor suddenly feeling like ice beneath my feet. My own father, the man who taught me how to ride a bicycle, the man whose approval I had subconsciously chased my entire life, just casually admitted to committing felony wire fraud to fund my arrogant brother-in-law. He forged my signature on a corporate guarantor draft. He leveraged my hard-earned financial identity to bail out Trey's failing crypto scheme, all while assuming I would be too polite to fight back. Any other woman might have dropped to the floor and wept. Any other daughter might have frantically dialed her mother, screaming and demanding an explanation. But I do not cry. I do not shake. I do not reach out for answers because I already have them. Instead, a profound, chilling clarity washes over me. The sister I tried to tolerate is a parasite. The parents I tried to please are her accomplices. I flip a mental switch. The dutiful daughter is dead. The crisis manager is awake and I am clocking in. I tuck my phone into my pocket and walk straight out the sliding glass doors to the backyard. The summer heat is climbing, baking the stone patio. The catering team is in overdrive. The head chef is delicately slicing paper-thin pieces of Wagyu beef, while the waitstaff arranges hundreds of crystal champagne flutes into a towering pyramid. It is a breathtaking display of wealth and hospitality. I walk directly up to the catering manager, a stressed-looking man with a clipboard, and tap him on the shoulder. I tell him the party is officially canceled. He stares at me, completely bewildered, pointing out that the food is already prepared and non-refundable. I do not blink. I pull out my phone, open my banking app, and immediately wire an additional $5,000 directly into his business account. I tell him the extra $5,000 is for his silence and his speed. I instruct him to pack up every single ounce of food, every tray of Wagyu, every lobster tail, and every bottle of imported champagne. I tell him to load it all back into his refrigerated trucks and drive straight to the downtown women and children's shelter. I want every resident there eating like royalty today. He looks at the transfer confirmation on his screen, nods briskly, and barks orders at his staff. Within 45 minutes, the entire catering operation vanishes. The massive lawn is completely empty. The silence returns, broken only by the hum of the cicadas in the heavy summer air. Now it is time to secure the perimeter. I pull up the Central Command application on my tablet. My house is a fully integrated smart home fortified with state-of-the-art security. With a few swift taps, I delete every single guest passcode. I specifically locate the emergency backup code I gave my father last month and permanently erase it. I change the master digital lock combination to a random alphanumeric string, but locking the doors is not enough. I want them to feel the full weight of their entitlement burning under the midday sun. I walk over to the utility panel in the garage. I manually shut off the main outdoor water valves. The automated sprinklers deactivate. The aesthetic fountains by the pool drain into silence. They will not even be able to get a drop of water from the garden hose. Next, I open the electrical breaker box. I find the switches corresponding to the patio fans, the outdoor refrigeration units, and the massive shaded pergola. I pull them all to the off position. The gentle cooling breeze from the overhead fans instantly dies. The outdoor outlets go completely dead. I have transformed my luxury estate into an impenetrable, sweltering fortress. I walk upstairs to my master suite. I pull my signature orange Hermes weekender bag from the closet. I methodically pack my designer swimsuit, a silk cover-up, and my favorite oversized sunglasses. I check my reflection in the mirror, fixing a stray strand of hair. I look calm, wealthy, and entirely unreachable. I walk out the front door, making sure I hear the heavy deadbolt automatically slide into place. I slide into the leather seat of my car, start the engine, and merge onto the highway. I drive 2 hours north to an exclusive members-only spa resort hidden in the mountains. I hand my keys to the valet, walk straight to the private cabana I just rented, and sit down on the plush lounge chair. I pull out my phone, toggle the settings to Do Not Disturb, and place it face down on the table. A waiter approaches, and I order a double mimosa. I lean back and close my eyes, knowing that right now my family is driving straight into a perfectly executed trap. It is exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The temperature has skyrocketed to an oppressive 95 degrees. I am lying comfortably on a plush lounge chair under the deep shade of my private cabana at the mountain spa. A cool breeze brushes past me as I sip my mimosa. I pick up my tablet and open the smart home security application. The live feed from my front porch camera pops up on the crisp screen in high definition. The show is about to begin. A fleet of luxury vehicles begins pulling into my long driveway. First is Trey's leased Porsche, followed closely by my parents' SUV. Behind them is a steady stream of sleek black cars, carrying the 50 VIP tech investors Trey invited to witness his grand illusion. The doors open and the players step onto the blistering hot asphalt. Madison emerges first. She is wearing a heavy floor-length designer maternity gown made of thick silk. It might look stunning in an air-conditioned ballroom, but out here in the brutal midday heat it is a suffocating trap. Trey steps out next, looking incredibly smug in a dark heavy wool suit. He adjusts his tie, oblivious to the impending disaster. My parents follow, smiling brightly, ready to play their roles as the supportive wealthy in-laws. They greet the confused-looking investors, shaking hands and pointing proudly toward my house as if they actually own it. Trey leads the massive group up the stone pathway toward the backyard patio. I watch through the rear cameras as they round the corner. The smug smile on Trey's face instantly vanishes, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. The sprawling lawn is completely barren. There are no massive white tents. There is no Wagyu beef carving station. There is no towering crystal champagne pyramid. The aesthetic pool fountains are dead and silent. The overhead patio fans hang motionless. The entire outdoor entertainment space, which was supposed to be the luxurious backdrop for his fake corporate acquisition, looks like an abandoned property baking under the merciless sun. I zoom in on the camera feed. The confusion ripples through the crowd of elite investors. These are wealthy, impatient people who expect to be pampered. Instead, they are standing on scorching hot patio stones in the middle of a 95-degree heatwave with absolutely zero shade. There is not even a drop of water available. Sweat begins to bead on their foreheads. A few of them start checking their luxury watches and whispering to one another, clearly irritated. Trey completely loses his composure. He rushes to the back sliding glass doors and yanks on the handle. It does not budge. He presses his face against the tinted glass, desperately peering inside my dark, empty kitchen. He runs over to the digital keypad on the wall and hastily punches in the backup code my father gave him. A red light flashes, followed by a harsh error beep. He punches it in again, his fingers trembling. Error beep. He looks back at the crowd of sweating investors, his eyes wide with rising panic. His heavy wool suit is already showing dark sweat stains under the arms. Madison waddles up to the door, her face flushed red from the suffocating heat of her silk gown. She aggressively jiggles the handle, whining loudly. My father marches over, looking furious, and tries to force the lock himself. The investors watch this pathetic display, the whispering growing louder. The grand illusion of a successful tech CEO acquiring a multi-million-dollar estate is evaporating right in front of them, replaced by the reality of a frantic man locked out of a house he clearly does not own. My phone vibrates on the table. It is Trey calling. I let it ring. He calls again. I decline it. My screen lights up with 5 rapid text messages from my mother demanding to know where the caterers are and why the doors are locked. The panic in their texts is palpable. They are trapped outside with 50 angry millionaires and zero explanations. I take a slow, deliberate sip of my cold mimosa. I open the family group chat. I do not type a long, emotional paragraph. I do not demand an apology. I simply attach the 3-minute video file I received this morning. I wait exactly 10 seconds to ensure it delivers to all of their phones. Then I type a single devastating text message. Party canceled. Locks changed. Have fun explaining this to your investors. I hit send, lock my phone screen, and set it face down on the table. I lean back against the cushions of the lounge chair, close my eyes, and take another sip of my drink, feeling absolutely nothing but sweet, complete satisfaction. The silence lasts exactly 30 seconds. Then my phone begins to vibrate so violently it practically dances across the glass table of my cabana. I pick it up, watching the lock screen light up with an absolute avalanche of notifications. The family group chat is exploding. I unlock the device and slowly scroll through the chaos, reading the frantic messages while the mountain breeze cools my skin. My mother, Susan, is the first to launch an attack. She is typing in all capital letters, firing off messages back to back. She demands that I drive back to the house immediately. She writes that I am overreacting to a stupid drunken joke. She claims that Madison is severely overheating, that the baby is in acute physical danger, and that I am being a completely heartless monster. It is fascinating how quickly she tries to rewrite reality. A silly joke. That is the phrase she uses to describe a calculated multi-million-dollar plot to steal my estate and forge my signature. Before I can even process my mother's delusion, Madison chimes into the chat. She sends a highly dramatic selfie taken from a low angle. In the photograph, she has heavy tears streaming down her face. Her mascara is perfectly smudged beneath her eyes, and she is looking up at the camera with a wide, desperate, panicked expression. She follows the photo with a barrage of texts. She types that her chest is tight. She says she cannot breathe the thick, humid air and that she feels dizzy. She accuses me of actively risking the health of my unborn niece or nephew just to be petty. It is classic Madison. This is the exact playbook she has used her entire life. Whenever she is caught red-handed doing something terrible, she instantly weaponizes her fragility. Growing up, this exact tactic worked every single time. If she stole my belongings or ruined my projects, she would force herself to hyperventilate and cry until my parents punished me for upsetting her. They always enabled her victimhood, forcing me to apologize for her mistakes. But I am no longer a helpless teenager trapped in their toxic household. I am a professional crisis manager who dismantles lies and destroys false narratives for a living. I do not engage with her emotional manipulation. Instead, I seamlessly switch applications on my phone and open my smart home security feed again. I toggle over to the main front porch camera. The lenses on my security system are commercial grade, offering resolution sharp enough to read a license plate from 50 feet away. I zoom in directly on Madison. As expected, she is not crying. She is not gasping for air or clutching her chest in pain. She is standing comfortably in the deepest shade of the portico. She is holding a glossy business magazine that she must have pulled from one of the investor's luxury cars, using it to aggressively fan her face. With her other free hand, she is holding a small designer compact mirror. I watch her carefully unscrew a tube of expensive makeup and calmly reapply a fresh coat of peach lip gloss. She looks hot and severely annoyed, but she is entirely perfectly fine. I take a crisp, high-definition screenshot of the live video feed. I switch back to the family group chat and upload the photo right below her fake, crying selfie. I do not write a long paragraph explaining how pathetic her lie is. I just add a single piercing sentence. I type the lip gloss looks great, but the lighting on my porch is terrible for acting. The chat goes completely instantly dead silent. I can vividly picture the four of them standing on my blazing hot driveway, staring at their glowing screens in absolute paralyzing disbelief. The sudden realization that I am actively watching their every single move, exposing their blatant lies in real time, must be utterly humiliating. Through the camera feed, I watch Madison look down at her phone, turn pale, and quickly shove her lip gloss back into her designer purse. Trey is pacing frantically, pulling at the collar of his wool suit, surrounded by tech investors who are now openly complaining and pointing fingers at him. For 2 full minutes, not a single person types a word in the group chat. They have absolutely no defense left. The social pressure from the wealthy VIP guests standing behind them is mounting by the second. Then a new text bubble appears at the bottom of my screen. It is from my father, Richard. He has completely abandoned the fake apologies and the manipulative guilt trips. He resorts to pure aggressive intimidation. His text pops up on my screen dripping with venom and desperate authority. He writes, "You ungrateful brat, I am the co-signer on this house. I have legal rights to this property, and I am calling the police right now." My father's text threat hangs in the digital air. Calling the police. It is the ultimate escalation, but it is exactly the desperate, chaotic move I anticipated. I do not reply to his text. I simply keep my eyes locked on the high-definition security feed. The situation on my front driveway is rapidly deteriorating from a private family dispute into a very public, humiliating spectacle. Trey realizes he is completely losing his audience. The 50 elite tech investors he invited are no longer whispering. They are openly complaining about the unbearable 95-degree heat and the lack of basic hospitality. Trey knows his multi-million-dollar illusion is evaporating. He needs to assert dominance and regain control of the narrative right now. I watch as he pulls his smartphone from his wool suit pocket, his hands visibly shaking. He dials 911 and deliberately presses the speakerphone button, holding the device up high so the crowd of wealthy VIPs can hear every single word. The emergency dispatcher answers, asking for the location and the nature of the emergency. Trey clears his throat, deepening his voice to sound authoritative. He tells the dispatcher that he is the chief executive officer of a major technology startup. He boldly claims that a hostile squatter has unlawfully taken over his newly acquired corporate headquarters. He actually uses my name. He tells the operator that Rebecca, a disgruntled former tenant, has illegally changed the smart locks and is holding his corporate property hostage. He demands that officers be dispatched immediately to remove me from the premises so he can conduct his executive business. It is a spectacular, audacious lie. He is spinning a web of corporate espionage and victimhood right on my front porch. But the audience he is trying to impress is not buying it. These investors are sharks. They built their fortunes by spotting frauds, and Trey is currently bleeding in the water. They look at this sweating, panicked man locked out of a residential home standing next to his heavily pregnant wife and his screaming father-in-law. The math does not add up. The sleek, successful tech mogul image is completely shattered. I watch through the camera as the investors begin pulling out their own phones. They are not taking photos. They are opening their ride-sharing applications. They are done with this circus. Within minutes, a steady stream of luxury black sport utility vehicles begins rolling down my quiet street. The investors start piling into the cars, slamming the doors, and driving away without even saying goodbye to Trey. Each car that drives off takes away a piece of his fake empire and the millions of dollars in investment capital he desperately needs to pay off his massive debts. Trey tries to stop them. He jogs down the driveway, waving his arms, pleading with them to wait just 5 more minutes for the police to sort out this minor administrative misunderstanding. They completely ignore him. Madison is crying real tears now, realizing the wealth she married into is a total fabrication. My mother is frantically trying to fan Madison with her hands, while my father paces back and forth across the burning concrete, glaring fiercely at the front door camera, as if his anger alone can shatter the lens. The commotion is impossible to ignore. My subdivision is an exclusive, ultra-wealthy neighborhood where noise and public scenes are strictly frowned upon. The yelling and the constant flow of vehicles have drawn an audience. I switch to my panoramic street camera. Neighbors are stepping out onto their manicured lawns. A retired surgeon across the street is standing on his porch with his arms crossed. A wealthy couple next door has stopped walking their golden retriever to openly stare at the bizarre meltdown happening on my driveway. My family is destroying their own social standing in real time. Then the piercing sound of sirens cuts through the heavy summer air. The flashing red and blue lights reflect off the windows of the remaining cars. 2 local police cruisers turn the corner sharply and speed down the paved street, pulling up right in front of my mailbox. The officers step out of their vehicles, resting their hands casually on their duty belts, assessing the chaotic scene. Trey sees his opportunity for absolute salvation. He aggressively wipes the heavy sweat from his forehead, straightens his wrinkled wool suit jacket, and completely transforms his entire demeanor. He puffs out his chest and struts confidently down the driveway toward the approaching police officers. He extends his right hand, putting on his best, most polished corporate executive smile, fully prepared to play the tragic victim of a crazy criminal squatter who maliciously ruined his day. The lead officer, a tall, no-nonsense man with a shaved head, ignores Trey's extended hand. He simply nods and asks for identification. Trey retracts his hand completely unbothered and launches into his rehearsed speech. He tells the officers that his tech company recently acquired this property for a corporate retreat and that a disgruntled former tenant has barricaded herself inside, maliciously locking out his pregnant wife and his guests. The officer pulls out a small notepad, sighs heavily in the heat, and asks for the physical proof of residence, or a deed of ownership. Trey smirks confidently, pulling out his smartphone. He swipes the screen and holds it up for the officers to inspect. He displays a highly fabricated digital document complete with fake watermarks and a counterfeit corporate seal. He smoothly explains that the physical paperwork is locked inside the house, but the digital deed proves his tech startup holds the legal title. The second officer squints at the bright screen, clearly skeptical of a digital-only proof for a multi-million-dollar estate. The officers exchange a quick glance. They have dealt with wealthy neighborhoods before, and they know that forced evictions require signed court orders, not just a portable document format file displayed on a mobile phone. Sensing the cops hesitating, my father steps aggressively into the frame. Richard pulls a folded stack of thick papers from his inside jacket pocket. He presents it to the lead officer with a look of deep paternal exhaustion. He explains that he is the financial CO signer on the property. He tells the police that the woman supposedly locked inside is his estranged, mentally unstable daughter who is currently having a severe psychological episode. He hands over the forged guarantor draft, pointing directly to my falsified signature at the bottom of the page. He begs the officers to break down the wooden door, claiming he desperately fears for the safety of the property, and his pregnant daughter standing right behind him. I am watching this pathetic performance from my cabana 2 hours away. The sheer audacity of my father trying to weaponize the police against me using a forged document is absolutely staggering. He is willing to have me arrested or violently removed from my own home just to save Trey's bruised ego. I set my mimosa down on the glass table. The time for silent observation is officially over. I open a secondary communication application on my tablet and dial my corporate attorney, David. He answers on the first ring. I quickly brief him on the escalating situation, merge the call with my smart home security application, and route the audio directly to the two-way intercom system installed on my front porch. I press the microphone icon. My voice suddenly booms out of the concealed outdoor speakers, echoing loudly across the scorching driveway. I speak with absolute icy precision. I say, "Good afternoon, officers. My name is Rebecca, and I am the sole owner of the property you are currently standing on." The entire group jumps in sheer terror. Trey physically stumbles backward, dropping his smartphone onto the hard concrete. Madison lets out a short shriek, clutching her chest. My father spins around, staring wildly at the front door camera lens, his face turning pale gray. The police officers immediately step back, placing their hands near their radios, scanning the wide porch to locate the source of my voice. I do not give my family a single second to recover. I continue speaking smoothly through the intercom, my voice projecting crisp and clear. I tell the officers that I am currently out of town on a business retreat and that the 4 individuals sweating on my driveway are trespassing. I then announce that I have my corporate attorney on the line who is ready to clarify the legal ownership of the estate. I tap the screen to unmute David. His deep, authoritative voice instantly fills the humid summer air. He introduces himself as senior legal counsel for my firm, reciting his state bar credential number for the officers to verify on their computers. David does not mince words. He speaks with the devastating weight of the law. He calmly informs the police that the multi-million-dollar estate was purchased less than 30 days ago, with 100% cash from my private limited liability company. He states that there is no mortgage, there are no co-signers, and there is no corporate acquisition pending. Then David delivers the final blow. He clearly tells the officers that the digital deed Trey displayed and the physical guarantor draft Richard is holding are entirely fraudulent. He states on the recorded line that presenting those forged documents to law enforcement constitutes a severe federal offense. The lead officer's expression immediately hardens. He instructs his partner to return to the police cruiser and run the property address through the official county database. The tension on the driveway is suffocating. My father tries to backtrack, stammering that there must be some sort of administrative mix-up at the bank. Trey is completely silent, his jaw clenched, staring at the concrete. Madison is holding her stomach, looking frantically between the police officers and her husband. The second officer soon steps out of the cruiser and nods sharply. He confirms loudly that the estate is registered exclusively under my corporate limited liability company and that there are absolutely no liens, mortgages, or co-signers attached to the deed. The lead officer turns his attention back to my father and Trey. He points a stern finger toward the street. He tells them that they have exactly 1 minute to vacate my private property. If any of them are still standing on my driveway when 60 seconds are up, they will all be placed in handcuffs and formally charged with criminal trespassing. He adds that they are incredibly lucky my attorney is not demanding immediate federal charges for the forged documents right this second. The few remaining tech investors lingering near the street finally realize the absolute severity of the situation. This is not a family misunderstanding. This is a blatant criminal fraud. They shake their heads in pure disgust. A late investor looks at Trey and calls him a pathetic con artist. The investor turns around, gets into his waiting luxury car, and slams the door. The final nail in the coffin of Trey's fake corporate empire is hammered in right in front of my security cameras. The walk of shame down my long manicured driveway is a spectacular display of defeat. My mother is sobbing quietly, hiding her face behind her expensive handbag so the watching neighbors cannot see her crying. My father is marching ahead, his face bright red with boiling rage, completely abandoning his pregnant daughter and his son-in-law. Trey looks like a deflated balloon. His heavy wool suit is soaked with sweat, his shoulders slumped as he drags his feet toward the public sidewalk. Then Madison completely loses whatever tiny shred of dignity she has left. The moment her expensive designer heels touch the municipal concrete of the sidewalk, she erupts. She throws a massive screaming tantrum right there on the street. She begins shrieking at the top of her lungs, stomping her feet like a spoiled toddler. She screams at Trey, demanding to know how he could possibly let this happen to her. She screams that she is a pregnant woman, that she deserves to be inside the air-conditioned house, and that she is going to pass out from the heat. She violently swats away my mother's attempts to calm her down. The neighbors watch in stunned silence as a grown woman in a maternity gown has a full-blown meltdown on the pavement. Trey tries to do damage control. He desperately needs to get his screaming wife out of the scorching sun and away from the staring eyes of the entire wealthy neighborhood. He pulls his key fob from his pocket and rushes toward his sleek black Porsche Panamera parked along the curb. He clicks the unlock button, reaching for the door handle to get Madison into the air conditioning. But before his fingers can even graze the metal handle, the loud grinding sound of diesel engine brakes interrupts Madison's screaming. A massive heavy-duty tow truck abruptly reverses down the street, its yellow hazard lights flashing brightly. The truck violently stops right parallel to Trey's luxury car. The driver, a burly man wearing a neon safety vest, jumps out of the cab holding a metal clipboard. He completely ignores Trey and walks straight over to the two police officers who are still standing at the end of my driveway. The tow truck driver hands the lead officer a stack of paperwork. The officer reviews the documents, looks over at Trey, and gives the tow truck driver a firm nod of approval. The driver immediately grabs the heavy steel hooks from the back of his truck. Trey drops his car keys on the grass. He runs toward the driver, shouting that there is a massive mistake, that he just made a payment last week and begging him to stop. The driver does not even look at him. He loudly announces that he has a certified bank repossession order for the vehicle due to 6 months of unpaid lease installments. Right in front of the police, the staring neighbors, my horrified parents, and his shrieking wife Trey's prized Porsche is hoisted up into the air and towed away down the street. The heavy diesel engine of the tow truck fades into the distance, leaving behind an absolutely suffocating silence on my front curb. Trey just stands there, his arms hanging limply at his sides, staring at the empty patch of asphalt where his fake billionaire status symbol used to be. The lead police officer checks his watch and coldly reminds them that they now have less than 30 seconds to vacate the subdivision before he starts writing criminal citations for trespassing. Panic finally overrides Madison's theatrical tantrum. She realizes they are stranded in a gated community with no vehicle baking in the 95-degree sun. She frantically digs into her designer purse and pulls out her smartphone to order an Uber XL. Her hands are shaking so badly, she drops the phone twice on the scorching concrete. She finally manages to open the ride-sharing application and requests a premium sport utility vehicle. But when the application prompts her for payment, a bright red error message flashes across her screen. Her primary gold credit card is declined. She gasps, her face flushing a deeper shade of red. She quickly types in the numbers for her backup credit card. Declined again. The financial freeze I initiated this morning by alerting the authorities to Trey's fraud is already cascading through their shared accounts. Madison looks up, pure terror in her eyes. She turns to my mother, whining loudly that her accounts are frozen. Susan, looking completely mortified as the wealthy neighbors continue to stare from their porches, hastily pulls out her own wallet. With trembling fingers, my mother inputs her personal credit card information into Madison's phone and secures the ride. For 10 agonizing minutes, the four of them are forced to stand on the edge of the street like evicted tenants. They are sweating heavily through their expensive clothes, forced to endure the judging whispers of the neighborhood while they wait for a stranger to pick them up. When the black Chevrolet Suburban finally arrives, they practically shove each other out of the way to get into the air-conditioned cabin. I know exactly what happens next, because in her frantic state, my mother forgets to lock her phone screen before shoving it back into her cluttered purse. She accidentally dials my number. Sitting in my quiet cabana 2 hours away, I watch my phone screen light up with an incoming call from Susan. I do not answer, letting it go straight to my secure corporate voicemail system. 5 minutes later, I receive an audio file of a highly detailed pocket dial recording. I put my wireless earbuds in, sip my drink, and listen to the spectacular implosion of my family. The ride of hell is perfectly captured in high-definition audio. The moment the heavy car doors slam shut, the polite masks completely fall off. Madison is the first to strike. Her voice is shrill and venomous. She screams at Trey, asking him how he could possibly let his car get repossessed in front of half of Silicon Valley. She tells him he is a complete embarrassment, a fake, and a broke loser. She cries that she married a successful tech executive, not a pathetic fraud who cannot even afford his own car lease. She refuses to raise a child in poverty. Trey does not sit there and take it. His fragile ego is shattered and he immediately lashes out like a cornered animal. He screams right back at his pregnant wife, telling her to shut her mouth because her endless expensive shopping habits drained whatever legitimate capital his business had left. But he quickly pivots his rage toward the man sitting in the front passenger seat. Trey violently blames my father. Trey yells that this entire disaster is Richard's fault. He says Richard was the one who promised to secure the forged guarantor draft flawlessly. Trey accuses my father of being sloppy, of underestimating my intelligence, and of failing to protect the financial side of their master plan. Richard explodes. My father's booming voice overpowers the tiny speaker of my earbuds. He curses at Trey, telling him he is an ungrateful parasite who ruined this family. Richard screams that he put his own neck on the line, committing a federal crime to fund Trey's worthless crypto startup, and this is the respect he gets. The audio is pure chaos. My mother is sobbing in the background, desperately begging them to lower their voices because the driver is listening to every single word of their illegal conspiracy. The inside of that luxury vehicle has turned into a toxic pressure cooker of blame and resentment. They are tearing each other apart, but my father is a man who refuses to ever accept defeat. Through the screaming on the recording, I hear Richard suddenly slam his fist against the car door. He commands the entire vehicle to shut up. His voice drops into a dark, calculated growl. He tells them to stop panicking. He confidently states, "We will go to her office tomorrow. She cannot do this to family. I know her weakness." My father's recorded threat echoed in my earbuds. I knew exactly what they were planning. They thought they could corner me in my professional environment, use the threat of a public scene to force my hand, and manipulate my deep sense of familial obligation. They were horribly mistaken. Monday morning arrives with crisp, cold efficiency. My public relations firm occupies the entire top floor of a downtown high-rise. It is a fortress of polished marble floor-to-ceiling glass walls and silent, fast-paced productivity. At exactly 9:30 in the morning, the elevator doors slide open. My receptionist, a sharp woman named Claire, immediately stands up as four deeply agitated people march into the pristine lobby. Richard is leading the charge wearing a dark suit, his face set in a mask of righteous indignation. Susan is right behind him, clutching her purse with white knuckles. Madison is wearing another dramatic maternity dress, holding her lower back, and sighing heavily to ensure everyone in the lobby notices her suffering. Trey trails behind them, looking exhausted and completely stripped of his arrogant tech executive persona. He looks like a man walking to his own execution. Claire raises her hand, politely informing them that I do not take unannounced meetings. Richard ignores her, raising his voice and demanding to see his daughter immediately. He threatens to stand in the lobby all day and make a massive scene if I refuse to come out. He expects me to panic. He expects me to rush out of my private office, shush them, and quickly usher them into a quiet corner to avoid professional embarrassment. He still thinks I am the little girl terrified of his temper. I do not panic. I have been waiting for them since 8 o'clock this morning. I press a button on my desk console and instruct Claire to let them through. I step out of my private office, but I do not take them into the back rooms. Instead, I walk them directly into the main executive conference room, located in the exact dead center of the office floor. The room is entirely enclosed in transparent soundproof glass. Every single one of my 35 employees sitting at their sleek workstations can see perfectly into the room. It is a brilliant psychological trap. My family thrives on operating in the shadows, manipulating narratives behind closed doors. By placing them in a literal glass box, I am stripping away their ability to lie. They are on full public display. My parents and my sister walk into the room looking slightly unnerved by the extreme transparency. The acoustic seal on the heavy glass door hisses shut behind them, cutting off all sound from the outside floor. I walk to the head of the long mahogany table and sit down in the leather executive chair. I do not offer them anything to drink. I do not ask them how they are doing. I simply place my hands flat on the polished wood. Resting directly in front of me is a massive 3-inch thick black binder. It is packed with printed spreadsheets, bank statements, legal filings, and forensic accounting reports. The physical weight of the binder lands on the table with a heavy, intimidating thud. Trey stares at the black binder, a visible bead of sweat forming on his temple. Susan does not even wait for everyone to sit down before she launches into her rehearsed performance. She dramatically pulls a tissue from her purse and begins dabbing at her completely dry eyes. Her voice trembles with perfectly calibrated emotional manipulation. She looks across the table and tells me that I have deeply broken her heart. She claims that my cruel and vindictive behavior yesterday caused Madison to experience severe abdominal cramping from the heat exhaustion. She points a shaking finger at me and demands that I immediately apologize for endangering my unborn niece or nephew. She tells me that family is the most important thing in the world, and that I need to stop being so selfish, open my checkbook, and fix the terrible mess I have created for my sister. Richard stands tall next to her, nodding sternly, crossing his arms to reinforce his wife's guilt trip. They expect me to crumble. They expect the heavy weight of a mother's tears to finally break my boundaries. I do not even look at my mother. I do not acknowledge her fake tears or her ridiculous demands. I keep my eyes locked dead on Trey. I reach forward, place my hand flat on the cover of the thick black binder, and slowly slide it across the smooth mahogany table. It stops right in front of my brother-in-law. I lean back in my leather chair, steep my fingers together, and speak with absolute lethal calm. I say, let us talk about Trey's crypto scam instead. The word scam hangs in the conditioned air, completely shattering the meticulously crafted illusion my family walked in with. Trey's posture stiffens instantly. The exhausted, defeated look he carried from the lobby is replaced by sheer panic. He instinctively reaches across the mahogany table for the thick black binder, but I place my palm firmly on top of it, stopping him cold. I slowly flip the heavy cover open. The first page is a highly detailed forensic accounting summary of his corporate entity. As a crisis management executive, my firm retains some of the most ruthless financial investigators in the country. When someone threatens my property and my peace, I dissect their entire existence down to the last penny. I look directly into Trey's terrified eyes and begin dismantling his life's work. I explain clearly that his flashy technology startup is nothing but a textbook Ponzi scheme built entirely on worthless cryptocurrency tokens and manipulated financial spreadsheets. He has absolutely no proprietary software and no legitimate revenue stream. He simply takes massive amounts of capital from new investors to pay off the expected dividends of his early backers. He has been systematically skimming off the top to fund his leased Porsche, his custom-tailored suits, and Madison's endless designer shopping sprees. The absolute silence in the glass-enclosed conference room is deafening. My parents stare blankly at the complex spreadsheet I slide across the table. Susan's fake tears instantly dry up. I do not give Trey a single chance to interrupt. I turn to the next page in the binder, which displays a terrifying column of negative numbers printed in bright red ink. I look directly at Madison, who is now clutching her stomach, her face drained of all color. I tell my sister the brutal truth about the man she married. I announce that Trey currently owes $1.5 million to a group of highly aggressive, unregulated private lenders. These are not polite bank managers who send gentle reminder emails. These are ruthless, dangerous individuals who repossess luxury cars in broad daylight and destroy lives to recoup their stolen money. I watch the terrifying realization wash over my parents' faces. I explain that the extravagant outdoor party yesterday had nothing to do with celebrating Madison's pregnancy. It was a desperate theatrical performance orchestrated by a cornered man. Trey invited those 50 wealthy investors to my house because he needed to create an immediate illusion of massive corporate success. He planned to use my estate as a fake physical asset to legitimize his failing company. His ultimate goal was to blindside those VIP guests with an acquisition announcement, pressure them into investing an emergency $2 million on the spot, and use that stolen capital to pay off his dangerous creditors. I tap the forged guarantor draft resting inside the binder. I tell my father that his little forgery was the final piece of Trey's puzzle. Trey needed my perfect credit score to secure a bridge loan, just in case the wealthy investors walked away. Trey can no longer contain his suffocating panic. His fake wealth and his freedom are actively evaporating inside my transparent conference room. He leaps out of his leather executive chair with terrifying speed. He violently slams both of his hands onto the smooth mahogany table, the harsh impact rattling the heavy glass walls around us. His face is contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. He points a shaking finger right at my face, screaming at the top of his lungs. He calls me a jealous, miserable liar. He shouts that I fabricated the entire financial binder just to ruin his marriage and embarrass him. He demands that my parents ignore everything I just said, swearing repeatedly that his tech company is perfectly legal and that I am just a vindictive sibling trying to sabotage his success. My employees on the outside of the glass pause their typing, watching the silent explosion of his anger unfold. I do not flinch or back away from the table. I simply reach into my suit pocket, pull out my smartphone, and place it gently next to the thick black binder. I press a single button to wake up the screen displaying a confirmed delivery receipt from a federal government email address. I look up at Trey, matching his burning rage with absolute apathy. I say the FBI did not think I was lying when I handed them this exact same binder at 8 o'clock this morning. The three letters hit Trey like a physical blow to the chest. FBI. All the blood drains from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow shell of the man who strutted into my lobby 10 minutes ago. His knees buckle and he collapses into the leather executive chair, staring blankly at the glowing screen of my smartphone. The terrifying reality of federal prison is suddenly sitting right in the middle of the mahogany table. My father realizes his intimidation tactics have failed. The situation has escalated beyond a private family argument. Instead of apologizing for forging my signature, Richard simply changes his strategy. He steps around the massive table, placing himself directly between me and Trey. He points his thick finger at me, his voice booming with the exact authoritative tone he used to discipline me when I was a child. Richard orders me to open my corporate accounts right now. He tells me that I am the wealthy founder of a lucrative firm and I have millions sitting in liquid assets. He aggressively demands that I wire $1.5 million to Trey's private lenders by the end of the business day. He yells that Trey is my brother-in-law, that Madison is my sister, and that family protects family. He glares down at me with contempt and screams that I owe them for putting a roof over my head and raising me. I do not raise my voice. I do not stand up. I just look at the man who claims I owe him my entire existence. I take a deep breath and pull out the one piece of painful history I have kept buried for 15 years. I ask him if he remembers the morning of my 18th birthday. I coldly remind him that I had just received an acceptance letter to my dream university, along with a partial scholarship. I had worked tirelessly throughout high school, maintaining perfect grades, because I knew they would never willingly pay for my education. I tell the quiet room that I had meticulously saved $40,000 from tutoring and part-time jobs, depositing every single paycheck into a joint savings account my father legally controlled. Then I look directly at Madison. I remind her of the terrifying night she took my father's luxury sedan, drove it, while heavily intoxicated, and crashed it straight into the storefront of a local business. I recount the civil lawsuit the angry business owner filed against our supposedly perfect family. I turn my cold stare back to my father. I say you did not want your precious golden child to have a criminal record or face the actual consequences of her destructive actions. So without asking me, without giving me a warning, you drained every single penny of my $40,000 college fund to pay for Madison's massive out-of-court settlement. You selfishly stole my future to protect her from her own reckless crimes. I remind him of the devastating day I found out. I remember standing in the kitchen holding the empty bank statement, sobbing and begging him for an explanation. My father had simply looked at me with cold indifference and said that Madison needed the money more and that I was smart enough to figure it out on my own. I lean forward, resting my elbows firmly on the mahogany table. I tell Richard that he was right. I did figure it out. Being completely stripped of my savings and financially abandoned by my parents forced me to build this entire empire from absolutely nothing. It made me ruthless. It made me untouchable. It taught me that the only person I could ever rely on was myself. I tell him that I paid my debt to this family 15 years ago when my college fund bought Madison's freedom. I owe this family absolutely nothing. I will not spend a single dime of my corporate funds to save a brother-in-law who tried to steal my estate or a father who committed federal wire fraud. The silence inside the glass room is suffocating. My mother is staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. Madison is shifting uncomfortably in her chair, the heavy guilt of her past directly colliding with the absolute terror of her present. But Richard completely refuses to back down. His arrogance is too massive, his delusion too deeply ingrained. His face flushes a dark crimson. Richard violently slams his heavy hand on the back of Trey's leather chair and yells at the top of his lungs that was completely different. Madison was just a child. Suddenly, the heavy glass door of the conference room clicks open. A young, clear voice easily cuts through the suffocating tension. The voice says, "Madison is a monster." Everyone in the glass-enclosed conference room snaps their heads toward the doorway. Standing directly in the threshold is Zoe Trey's 16-year-old daughter from his previous marriage. She is wearing her crisp navy blue pleated skirt and white button-down blouse, the standard uniform of the elite private high school she attends. Her backpack is slung over one shoulder. She looks incredibly calm, her chin held high, radiating a quiet strength that completely contrasts with the panicked, sweating adults sitting around the mahogany table. Trey looks absolutely bewildered. He stares at his teenage daughter, his jaw slack, forgetting about the federal investigation I just dropped on his lap. He stammers, asking Zoe what she is doing downtown instead of sitting in her chemistry class. He tries to use his stern father voice, ordering her to wait in the lobby because the adults are having a complicated business discussion. Zoe ignores his command entirely. She steps fully into the conference room, the heavy glass door hissing shut behind her. She walks straight past her father, past my parents, and stands directly next to my leather chair. She places her hand lightly on the edge of the table, looking down at the terrified woman clutching her stomach. Zoe speaks clearly, making sure every single word echoes in the quiet room. She says Madison is a monster, and I am the one who sent the video. The collective gasp in the room is audible. Susan covers her mouth with her trembling hand. Richard's face goes completely blank. Trey shoots up from his chair, his eyes wide with shock and betrayal. He demands to know what she is talking about. He asks his own daughter why she would ever spy on her family and ruin his life over a stupid grudge. Zoe does not back down. She looks right into her father's eyes and delivers the crushing reality of what happens inside his home. She explains that she bought a tiny motion-activated security camera online 2 weeks ago. She did not buy it to uncover a massive corporate wire fraud. She bought it for basic self-preservation. She tells the room that whenever Trey left the apartment for his fake networking events, Madison would immediately drop her sweet, fragile act. Zoe details the horrific psychological abuse she has endured. She reveals that Madison regularly sneaks into her bedroom to steal her high-end skincare products and the cash I secretly slip into Zoe's birthday cards. But the theft was not the worst part. Zoe exposes Madison's blatant, disgusting racism. She tells the room how her stepmother would corner her in the kitchen, making cruel, degrading comments about her dark skin color and her natural hair. Zoe tells everyone how Madison would constantly remind her that she was just leftover baggage from Trey's past. Madison told a 16-year-old girl that she would never actually belong in this wealthy, perfect family, and that once the new baby arrived, Zoe would be completely replaced. Zoe looks at her father and says she set up the hidden camera because she knew Trey would never believe a word she said without hard, undeniable video evidence. She checked the memory card on Saturday morning, hoping to catch Madison stealing her gold necklace. Instead, she caught her father, her stepmother, and my parents drinking expensive wine and gleefully plotting to forge my signature and steal my $2.5 million estate. Zoe looks down at me, her expression softening. She tells the room that I am the only person in this family who actually treats her like a human being. So she extracted the video file and sent it directly to my phone. The revelation is absolutely devastating. Madison shrinks back in her chair, unable to formulate a single lie to defend her racist, abusive behavior. My parents look completely horrified, staring at their golden child as if they no longer recognize her. But Trey is the one who completely snaps. The overwhelming pressure of the federal investigation, his massive financial debt, and now the humiliating exposure of his failure as a father completely shatters his sanity. He realizes his own teenage daughter is the architect of his destruction. Trey lets out a guttural, furious scream. He completely loses his mind. He violently kicks his heavy leather chair out of the way and lunges directly across the wide mahogany table, his hands outstretched, intending to physically silence his own child. He does not even make it halfway. The heavy glass doors of the conference room burst open. Before Trey's fingers can even graze Zoe's school uniform, two of my massive, highly trained corporate security guards charge into the room. They tackle Trey with brutal force, slamming him face first onto the polished hardwood floor. The heavy impact of Trey hitting the floor vibrates through the soles of my shoes. My two security guards, both former military contractors, expertly pin his arms behind his back, pressing their knees firmly between his shoulder blades. Trey gasps for air, his cheek smashed against the cold hardwood, his tailored wool suit instantly wrinkled and ruined. He struggles for a brief second, but the guards apply just enough pressure to let him know he is completely trapped. I walk slowly around the mahogany table and stand directly over him. I look down at the man who thought he could steal my home and forge my signature. I tell the guards to keep him pinned, but allow him to speak. Trey spits out a curse, glaring up at me with absolute hatred. He demands to know what kind of sick game I am playing with his daughter. I crouch down slightly so he can hear every single word with perfect clarity. I tell him this is not a game. I reveal that Zoe and I have been secretly communicating for the past 8 months. I tell him that while he was busy spending stolen investment capital on luxury car leases and expensive dinners, his teenage daughter was going to school with empty pockets. I tell him that I am the only reason Zoe has funds in her cafeteria account. I am the one who bought her advanced placement textbooks. I am the one who answers her text messages when she is crying because her own father is too busy protecting his racist, entitled new wife. Trey tries to shake his head, denying my words, but Zoe steps up right beside me. She looks down at her father with a cold, unbreakable expression and nods. She tells him that I have been more of a parent to her from a distance than he has ever been living in the same apartment. I stand back up and walk over to my leather executive chair. I reach past the thick black binder and pick up a sealed manila envelope. I walk back over to Trey and casually drop the heavy envelope right onto the floor, inches from his face. It lands with a sharp slap against the polished wood. I tell him exactly what is inside. I explain that it is a fully drafted, legally binding petition for emergency temporary guardianship of Zoe. My corporate attorneys filed it with the family court early this morning, simultaneously with the federal fraud report. I tell him that the petition meticulously outlines his gross parental negligence, his impending federal indictment for wire fraud, and his massive, crippling financial instability. But that is not all. I point at Madison. I tell Trey that the petition also includes a highly detailed section regarding Madison's documented psychological abuse and racial discrimination against a minor. I tell him that the security camera footage Zoe captured is not just proof of his real estate scam. It is Exhibit A in the guardianship filing, proving that his household is a toxic, dangerous environment for a 16-year-old girl. Trey is hyperventilating now. The reality of his complete destruction is finally crushing him. He looks frantically around the glass-enclosed conference room, desperately searching for a lifeline. He looks at my father, begging Richard to do something to call his own lawyers and fix this mess. Richard just stares blankly out the glass walls, completely paralyzed by the realization that his own forged signature is sitting on an FBI desk. Then Trey looks at his pregnant wife. He calls out Madison's name, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. He asks her to tell everyone that it is a lie that she loves Zoe and that they are a wealthy, successful family who can fight this in court. Madison stares down at her husband pinned to the floor. I watch the gears turning in her completely selfish, calculated mind. She processes the undeniable truth I just laid out. Trey has absolutely no money. His company is a fraudulent shell. His luxury car has been repossessed. He owes dangerous private lenders $1.5 million. And most importantly, the federal authorities are actively investigating him for major financial crimes. Trey is not a wealthy tech executive anymore. He is a broke, desperate criminal who is going straight to federal prison. Madison does not offer him a single word of comfort. She does not defend him. Instead, she physically recoils. She drops her hands from her stomach, pushes her chair back with a loud screech against the floor, and frantically steps away from him. She walks to the furthest corner of the glass room, pressing her back against the transparent wall, putting as much physical distance between herself and her husband as humanly possible. Madison stood against the glass wall, putting as much physical distance between herself and her husband as humanly possible. She looked at Trey, not with pity or concern, but with absolute unfiltered disgust. The mask of the sweet, fragile, pregnant wife melted away entirely, revealing the exact monster Zoe had just described to the room. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at the man pinned to the floor. Her voice, usually soft and manipulative, turned into a harsh, piercing shriek that vibrated against the heavy glass walls. She screamed that she had been completely tricked. She yelled that Trey had sold her a massive lie, promising her a life of private jets, luxury vacations, and limitless credit cards. She called him a broke loser, a pathetic failure who could not even afford the fake designer suits he wore. She demanded an annulment, immediately claiming she was a victim of severe marital fraud and refusing to spend another second married to a criminal. Trey strained his neck, looking up at her with desperate wide eyes. He begged her to calm down, reminding her that they were married and expecting a child. He asked her to stand by him, pleading for just a fraction of the loyalty he thought they shared. That plea for loyalty completely set her off. Madison unleashed a devastating, vicious tirade that stripped away every last shred of her dignity. She paced along the glass wall, hurling classist and deeply racist insults right at her husband's face. She screamed that she had lowered her social standing just to be seen with him. She claimed she generously overlooked his background, his lack of generational wealth, and his skin color solely because he promised her a multi-million-dollar lifestyle. She called him a street hustler playing dress-up. She told him he was nothing but a ghetto fraud who had infiltrated her wealthy, prestigious family. She shrieked that she gave him legitimacy in elite corporate circles, and he repaid her by turning out to be a broke, parasitic con artist. She told him she was deeply disgusted that she ever let him touch her, and that she would never allow her child to be associated with a federal convict from the gutter. Richard suddenly stood up, raising his hands, begging Madison to stop screaming such horrible things in a public office. But Madison instantly turned her venom on our father. She called Richard a sloppy, incompetent idiot for getting caught forging the documents. She blamed him for ruining her life, stating that if he had just executed the illegal real estate transfer correctly, none of them would be in this mess. The words were so violently hateful and entirely selfish that they seemed to suck all the oxygen right out of the room. My employees, watching from their desks outside the transparent walls, stood perfectly still in absolute shock. I turned my attention to my parents. Richard and Susan were standing completely frozen. For 30 years, they had fiercely protected Madison. They constantly made excuses for her selfishness, insisting she was just sensitive and misunderstood. They had drained my college fund, alienated me, and committed federal wire fraud simply to ensure her happiness. Now they were forced to listen to their perfect golden child spew the most vile, venomous hatred imaginable, throwing even them under the bus to save herself. The profound horror on my mother's face was undeniable. Susan finally saw the terrifying reality of what she had raised. Zoe stood quietly beside me. She did not cry. She just looked down at her father, watching him absorb the brutal reality of the woman he had chosen over his own daughter. Trey stopped fighting the security guards. His body went entirely limp against the polished hardwood floor. The frantic, desperate energy drained completely out of his muscles. He lay there for a long moment, breathing heavily, staring at the expensive designer shoes of the woman who was currently screaming insults at him. Then something snapped inside his brain. The humiliation and the betrayal broke right through his panic. A low, deep vibration started in his chest. It grew louder, echoing against the floorboards, until it turned into a dark, hollow, terrifying laugh. Madison stopped screaming, visibly unnerved by the sound. She commanded him to shut up, asking him what he could possibly find funny about ruining her entire future. Trey turned his head, pressing his bruised cheek against the floor, so he could look directly at her. His eyes were completely dead, but his lips curled into a vicious, unforgiving smile. He spoke slowly, making sure his voice carried perfectly across the quiet conference room. He said, "You want a divorce. Good luck paying half my debt, sweetheart. You signed the limited liability company operating agreement." The words hit Madison with the force of a freight train. Limited liability company operating agreement. Her eyes darted wildly around the room as her brain scrambled to process the legal reality of her own greed. When she married Trey, she had eagerly signed every single corporate document he placed in front of her, desperate to be listed as a co-owner of a flashy technology startup. She wanted the title. She wanted the prestige. But now that exact same signature legally bound her to $1.5 million of dangerous debt and tied her directly to a massive federal wire fraud investigation. She began to hyperventilate, her chest heaving as she pressed her back harder against the cold glass wall. She looked at Trey, who was still pinned to the floor by my security guards, smiling up at her with a sick, twisted sense of victory. He knew he was going to federal prison, but he had just guaranteed that he was dragging her right down into the abyss with him. Madison realized her carefully constructed life of luxury was completely over. She was about to be broke, heavily indebted, and publicly humiliated in elite social circles. In a state of pure, unhinged desperation, Madison decided to play her absolute final card. If she could not escape the financial ruin, she would utterly destroy the last remaining shred of his masculine pride. She took a bold step away from the glass, her face twisting into a mask of pure malice. She looked down at her husband and laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound that sent a chill through the room. She told him that he was not dragging her anywhere because they had absolutely nothing connecting them anymore. She placed both of her hands defensively over her pregnant stomach and looked right into his dead eyes. She screamed that the baby was not even his. The conference room went graveyard silent. Trey's sick smile instantly vanished from his bruised face. Madison did not stop there. She wanted to twist the knife as deeply as possible. She proudly announced that the child she was carrying actually belonged to her personal trainer, a 25-year-old fitness instructor she had been sleeping with for the past 6 months, right inside the apartment Trey was paying for. She shrieked that Trey was a blind, pathetic idiot who actually believed she would ever ruin her perfect body to carry his child. She yelled that he would get absolutely nothing from her, no loyalty, no family, and certainly no child to leverage in a messy family court battle. The impact of her brutal confession ripped through the room like a physical shockwave. My mother, Susan, let out a choked, breathless gasp. Her legs completely gave out beneath her. She collapsed heavily into one of the leather executive chairs, burying her face in her trembling hands. The pristine, flawless image of her perfect golden child shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of her eyes. Her beautiful daughter was not just a racist, abusive thief. She was a remorseless adulterer who had gleefully weaponized her own unborn child to manipulate her parents into committing federal crimes. Richard stood frozen, staring at Madison as if a complete stranger had just possessed his daughter's body. For decades, he had sacrificed my happiness, drained my savings, and risked his own freedom to build a protective fortress around Madison. He had forged a legal document just 48 hours ago because he thought he was securing a wealthy future for his precious grandchild. Now he realized he had destroyed his own life for a staggering lie. He was going to lose his house, his retirement, and his unblemished reputation for a fake tech executive and a child that did not even belong to her husband. The golden child was a complete, toxic illusion. Trey let his head drop flat against the hardwood floor. He closed his eyes, completely broken. The security guards loosened their grip slightly, realizing the man beneath them had absolutely zero fight left in his body. He was entirely hollowed out. Outside the glass walls, my entire staff was captivated by the silent drama. They could not hear the vicious words being exchanged, but the aggressive body language, the collapsing mother, and the man pinned to the floor painted a perfectly clear picture of absolute chaos. I stood at the head of the mahogany table, taking in the absolute devastation of the people who had tried to destroy me. They had come to my office to intimidate me, to force me to empty my bank accounts to save their perfect family. Instead, they had completely annihilated each other inside my transparent glass box. It was the most efficient, brutal crisis resolution of my entire career. I raised my hands and began to clap. The slow, rhythmic sound echoed sharply across the quiet room, snapping my parents and Madison out of their stunned silence. They all turned to look at me. I offered them a cold, apathetic smile. I said, "What a lovely family reunion. Now, all of you get out of my building before I press charges for assault." The two massive security guards immediately hauled Trey up from the hardwood floor by his armpits. He did not struggle. He did not say a single word to his pregnant wife or my stunned parents. He just let them drag his ruined, sweating body out through the heavy glass doors, his expensive leather shoes dragging uselessly across the pristine carpet of the main office floor. What fascinated me the most was that not a single member of my family even turned their heads to watch him leave. The man they had fiercely defended and praised as a visionary tech genius just yesterday was now entirely dead to them. He was a liability, so they discarded him instantly. Madison stayed pressed against the far glass wall, staring blankly at the floor. My parents, however, turned their desperate attention directly back to me. They completely ignored my explicit command to leave the building. Susan scrambled out of the leather executive chair and rushed toward my end of the massive mahogany table. She leaned her entire body weight against the polished wood, her hands tightly clasped together in a frantic posture of prayer. The fake manipulative tears from earlier were completely gone, replaced by genuine suffocating panic. She begged me to listen to her. She practically choked on her words as she pleaded for my ultimate mercy. She cried that Madison was about to be a completely broke single mother, facing a mountain of dangerous financial debt. She told me that Trey's aggressive private creditors would undoubtedly seize the luxury apartment by the end of the week, leaving her pregnant daughter out on the street. Susan looked up at me with wide, bloodshot eyes and begged that I let Madison move into my $2.5 million estate immediately. Richard stepped up right next to his wife, his previous arrogance and intimidation entirely erased. The booming, authoritative voice he used to threaten me with just 10 minutes ago was reduced to a pathetic, trembling whisper. He told me that my new house was massive, that it had 6 empty bedrooms, and that Madison desperately needed a safe, quiet environment for the sake of her unborn child. He actually had the absolute audacity to suggest that living with me would be a wonderful opportunity for the two of us to reconnect and finally heal our relationship as sisters. He promised that Madison would behave perfectly, that they would help with her daily expenses, and that this was my final chance to save our family from total public ruin. They were standing inside my corporate headquarters, fully aware that my father had forged my signature to steal my property, and they were still asking me to hand over the keys to my sanctuary. I looked at the two of them, genuinely marveling at the boundless depth of their entitlement and delusion. I did not raise my voice. I did not express any anger or sorrow. I just leaned forward and rested my forearms on the mahogany table. I told them that my house is my personal fortress, paid for entirely with my own blood, sweat, and tears. I coldly reminded them of the 3-minute video I had watched just 48 hours ago. I recited Madison's exact words back to them with perfect icy clarity. I said, "Why would you ever want your perfect golden child to live with a barren, unlovable automated teller machine?" I reminded them that they both sat in that cramped apartment drinking expensive wine, laughing as Madison mocked my inability to have a family, and gleefully plotting to steal the very roof they were now begging to sleep under. I told Susan that Madison had made her bed with a fraudulent con artist, and now she was going to sleep in it. I officially denied their ridiculous request and told them to find a local homeless shelter if they needed a free place to stay. I reached for the phone console on my desk to call the police dispatch and have them forcefully escorted out for trespassing. My mother saw my hand moving toward the phone and absolutely lost her mind. The crushing panic completely shattered her ability to maintain their dark family secrets. Susan violently grabbed her husband by the lapels of his dark suit jacket and shook him with terrifying force. She screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with sheer unadulterated terror. She yelled, "If you do not take her in, we will lose absolutely everything. Richard, tell her what you did." The echo of Susan's scream hung in the air of the glass-enclosed conference room. Richard did not shout back. He did not tell his wife to calm down or try to maintain his authoritative facade. Instead, the tall, imposing man who had commanded our family with an iron fist for my entire life simply deflated. His broad shoulders slumped forward. His hands began to shake violently at his sides. He looked down at the polished mahogany table, completely unable to meet my eyes or the terrified gaze of his wife. For the first time in 33 years, my father looked small, fragile, and utterly defeated. He swallowed hard, his voice barely a rasping whisper, when he finally forced himself to speak. He told me to think back to 8 months ago. He reminded me of the evening Trey had invited us all to an expensive steakhouse to pitch his crypto startup. Trey had asked me to become an early angel investor, needing a massive injection of corporate capital to get his platform off the ground. I had taken one look at his completely fabricated business plan, instantly recognized the obvious Ponzi scheme mechanics, and immediately refused to give him a single dime. I had warned my parents that night not to get involved. But Richard had taken my professional rejection as a personal insult against the family. He wanted to prove me wrong. He wanted to prove that Madison had married a financial genius and that my cold, calculating business instincts were flawed. Richard kept his eyes fixed on the wood grain of the table as he confessed his fatal secret. He explained that after I walked away from the dinner, Trey pulled him aside and played on his massive ego. Trey told him that if he provided the initial seed money, Richard would be a silent partner reaping millions when the company went public. Blinded by greed and his obsessive need to ensure Madison's luxurious lifestyle, my father made a catastrophic decision. Because he did not have $500,000 in liquid cash, Richard secretly went to the bank. Without telling Susan, without consulting a legitimate financial advisor, he took out a massive high-interest second mortgage on their fully paid-off family home. He signed away the equity they had spent 30 years building and wired a lump sum of $500,000 directly into Trey's fraudulent corporate account. Susan let out a horrifying, strangled gasp. She stumbled backward, clutching her chest, completely blindsided by the revelation that her husband had secretly gambled away the roof over their heads. Madison stopped leaning against the glass wall and stared at our father in absolute shock. The realization hit them both at the same time. The money Trey had been using to pay for Madison's designer bags and their luxury car leases had essentially been stolen straight from her parents' retirement. Richard finally looked up, his face pale and covered in a cold sweat. He explained the terrifying financial reality they were facing. He had been struggling to make the massive monthly payments on the second mortgage for the past 3 months because Trey had completely stopped paying him the promised dividends. Richard had been desperately holding out hope that Trey's grand acquisition announcement yesterday would secure new investor funds to bail him out of his debt. But now that illusion was dead. Because I had handed the thick black binder to the federal authorities this morning, the FBI had completely frozen every single asset, bank account, and shell company associated with Trey. My father was entirely cut off. He explained that the bank holding the second mortgage had grown tired of his delinquent payments and broken promises. They had officially initiated the foreclosure process on the family home. My parents were not just facing social embarrassment or a temporary setback. They were facing absolute total ruin. They were about to be forcefully evicted from the house they had lived in since I was a little girl. The air in the room grew heavy and suffocating. Richard reached a shaking hand into the inner breast pocket of his dark suit jacket. He pulled out a single folded piece of paper. He smoothed it out with trembling fingers and placed it flat on the mahogany table. He slowly pushed it across the smooth wood until it stopped right in front of me. I looked down at it. It was a blank Priority Bank wire transfer authorization form. Richard looked up at me, his eyes wide and completely stripped of his lifelong pride. The arrogant patriarch was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered man begging for his life. He pointed a shaking finger at the piece of paper. His voice cracked as he delivered his final plea. He said, "I need $600,000 today, or your mother and I are homeless." I looked down at the blank Priority Wire transfer authorization form resting on the polished mahogany table. The crisp white paper seems to mock the absolute destruction happening inside this glass room. I read the routing numbers and the massive sum of $600,000 printed neatly on the bottom line. My father has already filled out his receiving bank details. All it needs is my signature. Susan is holding her breath. I can see her chest rising and falling rapidly. Richard is staring at my hands, his eyes wide with a pathetic, desperate hope. He actually believes that despite the forgery, despite the betrayal, and despite the decades of emotional abuse, I will simply open my corporate checkbook and save him from his own disastrous choices. I reach across the table and pick up my heavy custom-engraved executive pen. My mother lets out a tiny audible gasp of relief. Madison finally looks up from the floor, a spark of salvation flickering in her tear-filled eyes. They think the dutiful, obedient daughter has finally returned to rescue them. I hold the expensive pen between my fingers, feeling its solid weight. Then, with a sudden, violent twist of my wrists, I snap the pen completely in half. Black ink splatters across the crisp white paper, bleeding into the numbers. I drop the two broken pieces directly onto the signature line. The sharp crack of the breaking plastic echoes loudly, instantly extinguishing the brief flicker of hope in their eyes. Susan flinches backward, covering her mouth. Richard stares at the ruined form in absolute disbelief. I lean back in my leather chair, fold my arms across my chest, and deliver my final verdict. I tell him that I am not signing anything. I tell him that he will not get a single dime from my personal accounts, and he certainly will not touch a fraction of a cent from my corporate firm. My father opens his mouth to argue, his face turning a sickly shade of pale gray, but I immediately raise my hand to silence him. I tell him to stop playing the victim and start listening to the cold, hard reality of the situation he has created. I remind him that I am a professional crisis manager. I deal with corporate fraud, federal investigations, and financial catastrophes every single day. I know exactly how the federal government operates when they uncover a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. I look directly into my father's terrified eyes and break down the absolute legal nightmare he is currently facing. I explain that he did not just hand Trey a personal cash gift. He took out a highly documented second mortgage and wired $500,000 directly into a fraudulent corporate shell company. But it is much worse than that. I remind him that he physically handed a forged guarantor draft to a sworn police officer yesterday afternoon. That single action officially cemented his role as an active accomplice in Trey's criminal enterprise. I tell him that the Federal Bureau of Investigation is already tracing every single dollar that went in and out of Trey's accounts. His bank accounts are entirely compromised. His financial profile is heavily flagged by the authorities. I lean forward, lowering my voice into a razor-sharp whisper. I tell Richard that if I wire $600,000 into his personal bank account today, the federal authorities will instantly freeze that transaction. They will classify my money as an illegal attempt to harbor a co-conspirator or launder stolen funds. I tell him that sending him that money would legally implicate my public relations firm in his massive federal wire fraud. I would lose my business license, my pristine reputation, and potentially my own freedom. I tell my parents that they built their entire lives around protecting and enabling Madison. They allowed her to steal my college fund, they allowed her to ruin my housewarming party, and they willingly committed felony fraud just to ensure she never had to work a day in her life. They thought Madison marrying a flashy tech executive was their ultimate ticket to high society. They ignored every single red flag because their greed completely blinded them to the truth. They traded their morality and their financial security for a worthless illusion. I look at Susan, who is silently weeping into her hands, unable to face the reality of her ruined life. Then I look at Richard, who is staring at the broken pen and the ink-stained paper on the table like a dead man walking. I deliver the final absolute truth. I say, you bet your house on the golden child. You lost. Pay the debt. Richard stared at the broken pen and the dark ink bleeding into the paper. His chest stopped moving. He looked like a man who had just been handed a terminal diagnosis. Susan let out a soft, whimpering cry, burying her face into her hands as the absolute reality of their homelessness finally settled over her. Madison remained frozen against the glass wall, her eyes wide, entirely mute now that her financial lifeline was completely severed. They thought the punishment was over. They thought the worst thing I could possibly do was deny them the money and let the bank take their home. But they severely underestimated the lengths to which I will go to protect the corporate empire I built from nothing. I reach into the bottom drawer of my desk and pull out one final single sheet of paper. It is not a financial spreadsheet or a bank statement. It is a thick official municipal document with a bright blue government seal stamped clearly at the top. I do not slide this one across the table. I stand up from my leather executive chair, walk around the mahogany table, and stand directly in front of my father. I look down at him. He slowly raises his head, his eyes red and completely defeated, waiting for the final blow. I hold the document up so he can read the bold black letters printed across the top. I explain to him that when he decided to forge my signature yesterday, he made a catastrophic miscalculation. He did not just forge the name of his daughter. He forged the signature of the chief executive officer of a prominent crisis management firm, and he attached my corporate limited liability company to a fraudulent financial instrument. I tell him that in the eyes of the law, that is not a minor family dispute. That is corporate identity theft and felony fraud. I explain the cold, calculating reality of my profession. As a woman who manages the public relations and legal crises of Fortune 500 companies, my personal and professional integrity must remain absolutely flawless. If my corporate attorneys discover a forged document bearing my company's name and I actively choose to hide it, I become legally complicit in the crime. I tell my father that covering up his forgery would instantly void my business licenses, destroy my firm, and subject me to the exact same federal investigation that is currently dismantling Trey. I tell him that I refuse to burn down my entire life's work just to protect a man who willingly handed me over to the wolves. I drop the official document directly onto his lap. I tell him to read the filing date and the timestamp. It is a formal police report. I explain that I did not just hand the black binder over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation this morning to expose Trey. I also walked directly into the downtown precinct at exactly 8:30 this morning and filed a comprehensive criminal complaint for forgery against my own father. I am officially pressing charges. The words hit the room with explosive force. Susan screams my name, lunging forward in her chair, reaching her hands out as if she can physically pull the words back into my mouth. She begs me to tell her it is a sick joke. She cries that he is my father, that he is an old man, and that he will not survive a day in a federal prison. Richard just stares down at the blue municipal stamp resting on his lap. His hands are shaking so violently that the paper crumbles under his grip. He looks up at me, his face completely devoid of any color, realizing that I am entirely serious. I have completely severed the bloodline. I have handed him over to the justice system without a single ounce of hesitation. I step back from him, my posture perfectly straight, my expression entirely devoid of emotion. I tell Susan that he should have thought about his age and his survival, before he committed a felony to fund his golden child's extravagant lifestyle. I tell them that the choices they made have natural, unavoidable consequences, and today is the day the bill finally comes due. Before Susan can scream another plea, a sharp, piercing sound cuts through the thick acoustic glass of the conference room. It starts as a distant wail, but rapidly grows louder, echoing off the concrete skyscrapers outside my office window. The piercing shriek of police sirens fills the downtown air. I look through the floor-to-ceiling windows facing the street below. Multiple police cruisers and unmarked federal vehicles are aggressively pulling up to the main entrance of my building, their red and blue lights flashing violently against the glass doors. I look back at my father, who is now paralyzed with sheer, unadulterated terror. I tell him that the police are not just downstairs to arrest Trey for the crypto fraud. They are coming up the elevator right now to arrest him for forgery. Before my father can even process the reality of my words, the heavy glass doors of the conference room are pushed open. The police do not knock. Two uniformed city officers step into the room, followed closely by a pair of federal agents wearing dark windbreakers. Through the transparent walls, I can see the rest of the strike team in the main office lobby. My security guards have already dragged Trey out to the main floor. One of the federal agents aggressively presses Trey against the reception desk, loudly reading him his Miranda rights. The sound of his constitutional rights being recited echoes across the entire floor, finalizing his absolute downfall. But the two uniformed officers inside the glass room are not looking at Trey. They walk directly toward the mahogany table. The lead officer looks at my father and asks him to confirm his identity as Richard. My father cannot even speak. He just gives a slow, trembling nod. The officer immediately instructs him to turn around and place his hands behind his back. Susan completely loses her mind. She lunges forward, desperately grabbing the sleeve of the police officer's dark blue uniform. She screams that there has been a terrible misunderstanding, that her husband is a good man, and that he was just trying to help his family. She begs the officer to stop pleading with him to look at the paperwork again. The second officer steps in, placing a firm hand on my mother's shoulder, loudly warning her to step back immediately, or she will be charged with interfering with a lawful arrest. Susan recoils, sobbing uncontrollably, her entire world collapsing in real time. Richard offers absolutely zero resistance. He turns around, his broad shoulders slumped in total defeat. The harsh metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists is the loudest sound in the room. It is the sound of 30 years of arrogant, toxic patriarchy being instantly snapped in half. The officer begins reading him his rights, reciting the standard procedure for felony forgery and corporate fraud. Richard looks over his shoulder at me one last time. There is no anger left in his eyes, only a hollow, terrifying emptiness. He expects me to suddenly break, to intervene and call my lawyers to save him. I do not move a single muscle to help him. I casually turn my back to the arrest and walk over to the sleek espresso machine resting on the side credenza. I pick up a porcelain cup, pour myself a fresh shot of dark coffee, and take a slow, deliberate sip. The warm, bitter liquid perfectly matches my mood. I turn around holding my cup and watch with complete, calculated apathy as the police officers firmly grab my father by his biceps and march him out of the glass room. Susan follows closely behind them, wailing loudly, her designer purse banging against her hip as she stumbles through the main office floor. My employees watch in stunned silence as the parents who came to intimidate me are publicly humiliated and escorted into the elevators by armed law enforcement. Within 3 minutes, the entire circus is gone. The heavy acoustic doors of the conference room hiss shut, leaving behind a sudden, heavy quiet. Zoe is still standing by my side, her posture relaxed, knowing she is finally safe from that toxic environment. But we are not entirely alone. Madison is still standing in the far corner of the glass room. She is completely paralyzed. The reality of her situation is crashing down on her with the weight of a collapsing skyscraper. Her husband is currently in the elevator headed to federal prison. Her father is in handcuffs, facing serious felony charges and the imminent foreclosure of his home. Her mother is utterly useless chasing a police cruiser down the street. And Madison is left standing there wearing a heavy silk maternity gown, carrying a personal trainer's child, and holding half of a $1.5 million fraudulent debt because she eagerly signed corporate documents she never bothered to read. She has no money, no credit cards, no car, and absolutely nowhere to go. She looks at the empty chairs, the broken pen, and the ink-stained paper left on the mahogany table. Then she looks at me. The arrogant, entitled golden child is completely gone. Her knees suddenly buckle. Madison drops heavily to the hardwood floor. She does not cover her face or try to look pretty. Real ugly tears stream down her cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. She crawls slightly forward on her knees, pressing her hands together, looking up at me with sheer, unfiltered desperation. She begs me not to throw her out on the street. Her voice cracks as she asks for a job, pleading that she will do anything. She begs me to hire her as a receptionist. I looked down at the woman kneeling on my polished hardwood floor. Madison, the untouchable golden child, the sister who had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate herself, was now a crumpled, weeping mess at my feet. She looked up at me with mascara running down her cheeks, her designer maternity gown pooling around her knees. She actually thought that performing submission would suddenly erase a lifetime of cruelty. She thought that asking for a minimum wage job in my lobby would somehow prove she had learned her lesson. I stepped back, physically removing myself from her desperate grasp. I looked at her with absolute chilling indifference. I told her that she would never work in my building. I told her that I run a highly secure elite corporate crisis firm, and I do not hire liabilities thieves or accomplices to federal fraud. I asked her if she truly understood what the next 10 years of her life were going to look like. I did not raise my voice, but I made sure every single syllable carried the heavy, crushing weight of reality. I told Madison that her luxurious life was officially over. I explained that because she had eagerly signed Trey's corporate operating agreements, his private creditors were coming directly for her. I painted a vivid picture of her immediate future. I told her she would be dragged into federal bankruptcy court. Every single piece of jewelry, every designer handbag, and every asset she thought she owned would be seized and liquidated. I told her that if she ever managed to find a basic hourly job, her wages would be aggressively garnished by the Internal Revenue Service and debt collectors before the money even hit her bank account. I did not stop there. I knew exactly what Madison valued most in this world. It was not family. It was not love. It was social status. I leaned down slightly and told her about her precious country club. I told her that the wealthy women she spent her afternoons gossiping with were already deleting her number from their phones. In elite circles, financial fraud is a highly contagious disease, and Madison was patient zero. I told her that she would be permanently shunned. She would be the cautionary tale they whispered about over expensive lunches that she could no longer afford. She was going to be a broke single mother living in the shadows of the wealth she used to flaunt, and no one was going to save her. Madison sobbed harder, her hands covering her face as the brutal truth of her new existence washed over her. She knew I was right. There was no magical escape hatch left to open. I stood back up and walked over to the sleek communication console resting on the side credenza. I pressed the silver button and calmly instructed my front desk security team to come to the main conference room immediately. Two large uniformed guards stepped through the heavy acoustic glass doors within seconds. They looked at the weeping woman on the floor and then looked at me for instructions. I pointed a single finger at Madison. I told the guards to escort her out of the building and to permanently revoke her visitor access. I instructed them that if she ever showed her face in this lobby again, they were to immediately call the police and have her arrested for criminal trespassing. Madison did not fight them. When the guards firmly grasped her arms and pulled her to her feet, all the energy completely drained from her body. She hung her head, her shoulders shaking, and let them lead her out of the room. She did not look back at me. She dragged her expensive heels across the carpet, walking the exact same humiliating path her husband and our parents had just taken. I stood in the center of the quiet room and watched the heavy glass doors hiss shut for the final time. The toxic, suffocating presence of my family was completely gone. I had surgically removed the tumor that had been draining my life for 3 decades. The bloodline was entirely severed. I turned around and looked at Zoe. The 16-year-old girl was standing quietly near the window, holding her school backpack, watching me with wide, respectful eyes. I offered her a soft, genuine smile. I walked over, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and told her it was time to go back to my private office so we could order some lunch. We walked out of the glass room together, leaving the broken pieces of my family's destroyed empire behind us. 3 months later. 3 months later, the crushing weight of the federal justice system finally finished flattening what was left of my family. The legal proceedings were swift, brutal, and entirely public. Trey did not even attempt to fight the massive fraud charges. Once the Federal Bureau of Investigation meticulously laid out the undeniable forensic accounting from my black binder, his high-priced defense attorney immediately advised him to surrender, facing the terrifying prospect of 20 years if he foolishly took it to trial. Trey accepted a strict plea deal. He was formally sentenced to 5 years in a federal correctional institution, followed by 10 years of heavily monitored financial probation. There were no news cameras flashing, no wealthy technology investors coming to his defense, and absolutely no loyal wife sitting in the courtroom gallery to support him. He was quietly hauled away in a standard prison uniform, entirely forgotten by the elite corporate world he so desperately tried to scam. My father faced a slightly different yet equally devastating fate. Richard avoided a federal prison sentence strictly because of his advanced age and his complete lack of a prior criminal record. The judge showed him a microscopic fraction of mercy by sentencing him to 5 years of strictly supervised probation. However, the financial penalties handed down by the court were absolutely merciless. Richard was ordered to pay massive, crippling restitution fines for his active role in the wire fraud and the corporate forgery. The severe financial penalties instantly drained whatever tiny scraps of retirement savings he had left hidden in his bank accounts. He was officially declared completely bankrupt by the state. The bank foreclosure on their house moved forward with ruthless corporate efficiency. The beautiful, sprawling suburban home where I grew up, the prestigious fortress of perfectly manicured lawns and pale blue bedrooms, was formally seized. It was sold at a public county auction for a mere fraction of its actual market value. My parents were given exactly 14 days to completely vacate the premises. They did not hire professional movers because they simply could not afford them. Richard and Susan were forced to pack 30 years of their arrogant, privileged lives into cheap black plastic garbage bags and load them into the back of a rented moving truck. Because they were entirely stripped of their assets and their credit scores were utterly destroyed, they could not secure a residential lease anywhere near our affluent city. They were forced to cross state lines and rent a dilapidated aluminum-sided mobile home in a rundown trailer park located right next to a noisy interstate highway. The mighty patriarch and the country club socialite were suddenly thrust into a harsh life of grueling minimum wage poverty. Susan, who had spent decades looking down her nose at the working class, was forced to take a part-time job as a grocery store bagger just to afford basic utilities. She spends her days standing on her aching feet, wearing a cheap polyester uniform, forcing fake smiles for customers who do not care about her past wealth. Richard fared no better. At 65 years old, the man who used to confidently forge corporate documents is now working the grueling graveyard shift as a night security guard. He patrols the dark chain-link perimeter of an industrial scrapyard, holding a heavy flashlight, earning just enough hourly wages to keep the lights on in their rented trailer. But the most profound poetic justice of all belonged to Madison. Shortly after the spectacular implosion in my glass conference room, Madison gave birth to a healthy baby boy. But her grand fantasy of starting a fresh, beautiful life with her young personal trainer vanished the exact second her bank accounts were legally frozen. The moment the fitness instructor realized he was not inheriting a wealthy, divorced socialite, but rather a completely broke, legally entangled woman, burdened with a mountain of fraudulent debt, he packed his gym bags and vanished without a single trace. He changed his phone number, blocked her on all social media platforms, and moved out of state, completely abandoning her. Now Madison is utterly trapped. She is living inside that cramped, poorly insulated mobile home with her exhausted, bitter parents. She shares a tiny, humid bedroom with a crying infant entirely dependent on the meager hourly wages of a grocery bagger and a night watchman. There are no designer maternity gowns anymore. There are no expensive restaurant brunches or exclusive country club gossip sessions. The inside of that trailer has become a toxic, suffocating pressure cooker of endless resentment. Richard loudly blames Madison for his humiliating bankruptcy. Susan bitterly blames Richard for losing their beautiful house. Madison viciously blames both of them for failing to protect her lifestyle. They are hopelessly locked in a vicious, unbreakable cycle of poverty and mutual hatred, constantly tearing each other apart, while the heavy highway traffic roars right outside their thin walls. While they suffocate in their own self-inflicted misery, I am breathing the cleanest air of my entire life. The contrast between our two worlds is absolute. I am sitting at the massive marble island in the center of my custom kitchen, bathed in the warm golden sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The silence in my $2.5 million estate is not heavy or isolating. It is profoundly peaceful. Footsteps echo lightly on the grand hardwood staircase. Zoe walks into the kitchen wearing the crisp navy blue blazer and plaid skirt of her elite private high school. She drops her heavy backpack onto a bar stool and opens the stainless steel refrigerator to grab a bottle of sparkling water. The transformation in her over the past 3 months has been nothing short of miraculous. The defensive, anxious posture she used to carry around her father and Madison is completely gone. Her shoulders are relaxed. Her eyes are bright and focused. Getting her out of that toxic apartment was the greatest executive decision I have ever made. I immediately enrolled her in intensive therapy sessions twice a week with a top-tier adolescent psychologist. Having a dedicated professional help her process the years of psychological abuse and blatant racism she endured under Madison has completely changed her trajectory. She is thriving academically. She recently made the honor roll, and she even joined the school debate team. But the most significant change happened exactly 1 week ago in a quiet, private family courtroom. After presenting the undeniable evidence of Trey's federal felony convictions, his massive financial fraud, and his gross parental negligence, the judge did not hesitate. Trey was permanently stripped of all his parental rights. I stood next to Zoe in front of the judge, raised my right hand, and officially adopted her. The piece of paper sitting in my safe does not just make me her legal guardian, it makes me her mother. It ensures that Trey Madison and my parents can never, ever get near her again. Zoe kisses my cheek, grabs a fresh apple from the ceramic bowl, and heads out the front door to meet her private driver for the morning commute. I watch the sleek black car pull out of the secure gates of my driveway. I pour myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee and sift through the small stack of personal mail my assistant dropped off earlier. Amidst the glossy corporate magazines and formal invitations, a cheap, wrinkled white envelope catches my eye. It is completely out of place. There is no return address printed in the corner, but I do not need one. I instantly recognize the frantic, slanted cursive handwriting scrawled across the front. It is from Susan. I slide my silver letter opener through the cheap paper. I pull out 3 pages of lined notebook paper covered in smudged blue ink. It is a desperate, rambling manifesto of misery. Susan begs for my forgiveness in the very first sentence. She writes in agonizing detail about how her legs swell from standing at the grocery store checkout line for 8 hours a day. She complains endlessly about the smell of the diesel exhaust from the highway next to their trailer park. She writes that Richard has become a bitter, angry shell of a man who screams at the television every night. She tells me that Madison ignores her own baby, leaving Susan to care the infant while she works minimum wage shifts. Then she attempts her classic emotional manipulation. She tries to weaponize my childhood writing about the days before Trey came into the picture, claiming we used to be a happy family. She says she misses her successful, brilliant daughter, completely ignoring the fact that she called me barren and unlovable just a few months ago. She begs me to send just a few $1,000s to help them turn the heat on for the winter. I do not even bother reading the third page. I feel absolutely zero pity. I feel no residual guilt, no tug of familial obligation, and no sorrow for the woman who willingly sacrificed me to fund a criminal. I walk out of the kitchen and step into my home office. I turn on the heavy-duty commercial-grade paper shredder tucked beneath my mahogany desk. Without a single second of hesitation, I feed the wrinkled pages and the cheap envelope directly into the sharp steel blades. The loud, satisfying grind of the machine instantly destroys my mother's pathetic apologies, turning her desperate manipulation into worthless confetti. I turn the machine off. The silence returns. I brush my hands off and look down at the heavy custom-engraved watch on my wrist. It is exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. A gentle knock echoes from the front foyer. I smile, walking out of my office and toward the grand double doors. I have a party to host. I swing the heavy oak double doors wide open. My lead event coordinator, a brilliant woman who has flawlessly executed dozens of corporate galas for my firm, steps inside with a warm, genuine smile. The estate is completely transformed, but this time, the transformation is entirely on my own terms. The oppressive 95-degree heat from 3 months ago has broken, replaced by a crisp, perfect 72-degree autumn afternoon. The sprawling backyard is not staged to impress wealthy tech investors or to fake a multi-million-dollar corporate acquisition. It is designed strictly for authentic joy. There are no pretentious white tents or towering crystal pyramids. Instead, there are comfortable linen seating areas arranged around the glowing stone fire pits, a live acoustic jazz trio playing softly near the swimming pool, and a massive rustic grazing table overflowing with incredible local food. This is the real housewarming party. By noon, my actual family begins to arrive. I am not talking about the family assigned to me by an accident of genetics, but the family I intentionally and carefully built. My entire public relations staff walks through the front gates laughing brightly and carrying expensive bottles of wine. David, my ruthless corporate attorney, who helped me dismantle Trey's fraudulent empire, arrives with his husband and gives me a massive hug. My closest friends, the strong women who supported me 15 years ago when my parents drained my college fund, are lounging comfortably on the patio. And most importantly, half a dozen teenagers from Zoe's private school debate team are gathered near the outdoor kitchen, completely devouring a tray of artisan flatbreads. There is no tension in the autumn air. There are no whispered arguments, no fake tears, no desperate financial plots, and no hidden security cameras waiting to catch a criminal conspiracy. The energy is pure light and wonderfully authentic. I step up to the edge of the raised stone patio holding a single crystal flute of vintage champagne. I tap the side of the glass with a silver spoon. The light ringing sound easily cuts through the jazz music and the overlapping conversations. The crowd naturally quietens down, turning their smiling faces toward me. I look out at the people who actually bring profound value to my life. I raise my glass slightly and begin to speak. I tell them that for a very long time, I was held hostage by a massive, dangerous lie. I explain that I was conditioned to believe the outdated, toxic myth that blood is thicker than water. I was taught that sharing biological DNA meant I had an unbreakable obligation to endure endless disrespect, financial manipulation, and emotional abuse from the people who were supposed to protect me. I tell my friends and my colleagues that society constantly weaponizes the word family to force successful, independent people into setting themselves on fire just to keep toxic relatives warm. But standing here on this patio today, I know the absolute truth. I tell the crowd that blood only dictates your starting line in life. It does not dictate your final destination, and it certainly does not dictate who gets a permanent seat at your dinner table. I lower my voice, speaking with absolute unwavering conviction. I tell them that true family is entirely a choice. It is a conscious daily decision to surround yourself with people who celebrate your victories without an ounce of jealousy. It is choosing people who respect your boundaries without resorting to emotional manipulation, and who love you for exactly who you are, not for what your bank account can provide them. I look at David, my employees, and my lifelong friends, and I thank them for their unwavering loyalty. I tell them that this massive property is no longer just a strategic real estate asset or a fortified bunker designed to keep the monsters out. Because of the people standing on this lawn, this beautiful estate has finally become a real home. The crowd erupts into genuine, heartfelt applause. I lower my glass and let my eyes drift across the manicured green lawn. I find Zoe standing near the edge of the bright blue pool. The afternoon sun is shining brightly on her face. She is throwing her head back, laughing hysterically at a joke one of her classmates just told. There is absolutely no fear in her eyes anymore. There is no shadow of her father's federal prison sentence or her stepmother's vile cruelty. She is just a normal, happy teenager, living a beautiful, safe life. I bring the crystal flute to my lips and take a slow, deliberate sip of the cold champagne. The taste is crisp sweet and absolutely perfect. The ultimate crisis has been completely managed. I have won, and for the first time in my entire life, I am completely at peace. This story completely dismantles the myth that biological ties obligate you to endure toxic behavior. Rebecca's journey proves that true family is defined by mutual respect and safety, not just shared DNA. Too often, people tolerate exploitation from relatives out of misplaced guilt, sacrificing their own well-being and success in the process. Protecting your peace is never selfish. It is absolutely essential for your survival. You have every right to curate your inner circle and walk away from those who exploit you. Evaluate your relationships today and boldly enforce the boundaries necessary to protect your peace. What is the hardest boundary you have ever had to set with a relative? Share your experience in the comments below.